"Who the hell did this to you?" demanded the Korean Mafia boss by morning. What he did next shocked the entire city, Part 2. I remember the exact moment I realized I had fallen in love with Jae-sung Kang. It wasn't when he found me bleeding in that alley a year ago. It wasn't during my recovery in his penthouse, surrounded by luxury that felt foreign to a medical resident drowning in student debt. It wasn't even during those quiet moments when he would bring me tea and sit in companionable silence while I studied for my boards. No, I fell in love with him on an ordinary Tuesday, for months after the attack. I'd just finished a 20-hour shift, my hands still smelling faintly of antiseptic, my mind foggy from lack of sleep. I stumbled into my small apartment, not his penthouse, but the modest place I'd insisted on keeping as my own space, to find Halmoni sitting at my kitchen table. My grandmother's eyes were clear that day, the dementia momentarily releasing its grip on her brilliant mind. And beside her sat Jae-sung Kang, the most feared man in Seoul, carefully rolling rice cake dough under my grandmother's exacting instruction. "No, no," Halmoni scolded him in Korean. "Gentler, like you're holding a woman's heart in your hands." Jae-sung adjusted his technique, those powerful hands. Hands that had broken men, that had built empires, that had saved me, now delicately pressing rice flour with the concentration of a surgeon. "Better," Halmoni approved. "You learn quickly for a man who's accustomed to having others do for him." I stood frozen in the doorway, watching this unlikely scene. Neither had noticed me yet. Jae-sung wore no suit jacket, his sleeves rolled up to the elbows, a smudge of flour on his forearm. His usual mask of controlled power had softened into something I'd rarely seen. Earnest attention, genuine desire to please. "Minseo used to make these with me every Sunday," Halmoni said, her voice dipping into memory. "Such clever hands. Always knew she would be a healer." "She saves lives every day," Jae-sung replied, his voice carrying a warmth I'd only heard directed at me. "Your granddaughter is extraordinary." "Ah, but who saves her?" Halmoni asked, suddenly fixing him with that penetrating gaze that had intimidated generations of medical students under her tutelage. "Who ensures she remembers to live while she's so busy keeping others alive?" Jae-sung met her eyes without flinching, a rare feat when faced with my grandmother's full attention. "I'm trying," he said simply. "If she'll allow it." That's when Halmoni noticed me. Her smile bloomed like a winter flower, rare and precious. "Minseo-ya, come. This young man has adequate technique, but nowhere near your skill." Jae-sung turned, and the look that crossed his face. Surprise, warmth, and something deeper that made my heart stutter, told me everything. This wasn't performance or manipulation. This wasn't the calculated charm he wielded in business. This was simply a man learning to make my grandmother's rice cakes because he knew they were my childhood comfort food. Because somewhere in his terrifying, brilliant mind, he had decided that my happiness was worth his time. I crossed the kitchen and picked up a handful of flour. "Let me show you how it's done properly." That night, eating slightly misshapen rice cakes while Halmoni told embarrassing stories from my childhood, I looked at Jae-sung Kang and realized I was in love with him. Not despite knowing what he was capable of, but with full awareness of the complexity of the man before me. The violence and the tenderness, the calculation and the spontaneity, the darkness and the surprising, stubborn light. A year later, so much had changed, yet that fundamental truth remained constant. I loved a complicated man who moved through dangerous waters with the confidence of someone born to them. And somehow, improbably, he loved a stubborn doctor who refused to surrender her independence even as she welcomed him into her heart. Earth to Dr. Park. Dr. Shin's voice pulled me from my reverie. "Your patient in 307 needs discharge papers. The board meeting starts in 20 minutes, and you've been staring at the same lab results for 5 minutes." I blinked, returning to the present moment, the bustling nurses' station at Seoul Hope Hospital, where I was now a full-time trauma surgeon after completing my residency 6 months ago. "Sorry. Mental inventory." I handed him the tablet. "The labs look good. Mr. Lee can be discharged with standard post-op instructions." Dr. Shin, the same physician who had treated me after the attack, who had later recommended me for the surgical position at Seoul Hope, raised an eyebrow. Mental inventory or mental vacation to wherever Jae-sung Kang is currently conducting business? Heat rose to my cheeks. After a year, I was still uncomfortable with how many people knew about my relationship with Jae-sung. Not because I was ashamed, never that, but because I wanted to be recognized for my work, not my personal life. He's in Singapore until Thursday, I replied, keeping my voice professional. And I was actually thinking about the trauma protocol revisions for the emergency department. Dr. Shin looked skeptical but nodded. Of course, which I'm sure will be the highlight of today's board meeting. The hospital intercom crackled. Trauma team to emergency. Incoming GSW, ETA 2 minutes. Relief washed over me. Not at someone's misfortune, but at the familiar clarity that emergency medicine brought. No ambiguity, no politics, just the clean focus of saving a life that hung in the balance. Saved by the bell, Dr. Shin remarked. I'll handle the board meeting. You take the trauma. I was already moving, shedding my white coat as I headed for the stairs, faster than waiting for the elevator. The emergency department was controlled chaos when I arrived, the team preparing for the incoming patient with practiced efficiency. What do we have? I asked the charge nurse, accepting the trauma gown she held out. Male, approximately 16 years old, multiple gunshot wounds to abdomen and chest. No identification. Found in Gangnam District by police responding to reports of shots fired. BP critically low at scene, intubated during transport. I nodded, mentally preparing as I tied the gown. The doors burst open as paramedics wheeled in the gurney. The boy on the stretcher was ghostly pale beneath blood-soaked bandages. Dark hair, expensive clothes now cut away and ruined. No obvious identifying features except, I froze momentarily, a distinctive tattoo on his right wrist, a double-headed eagle in black ink. Recognition flashed through me like electric current. That tattoo marked high-ranking members of the Koslov organization, the same Russian syndicate that had ordered my attack a year ago. The same organization Jae-sung had systematically dismantled in the aftermath, driving Viktor Koslov into hiding. But this was no foot soldier. This was a boy, barely into his teens, fighting for his life. Beginning primary survey, I announced, pushing personal recognition aside. Let's get 2 large-bore IVs if you haven't already. Type and cross for 4 units. Portable ultrasound. My hands moved with practiced precision, assessing damage while the team worked around me. 3 gunshot wounds, 2 to the abdomen, 1 that had entered the left chest. Massive internal bleeding, probable damage to the spleen and diaphragm. The chest wound had caused a hemopneumothorax, collapsing his lung. He's crashing, the nurse called as monitors screamed warnings. BP 60/40ths and dropping. Push 1 of AP and prepare for emergency thoracotomy, I ordered, already reaching for the thoracotomy tray. We need to relieve pressure and find the bleeder before we can get him to N/O. Time compressed into a series of critical decisions. Opening the chest at bedside, an extreme measure but necessary when seconds determine survival. Identifying the torn pulmonary vessel causing massive bleeding. Clamping, stabilizing, fighting against the clock as this young life flickered like a candle in wind. Got it, I finally said, clamping the vessel. Let's move 2 or 2. Continue massive transfusion protocol. Call cardiac surgery for backup. As we wheeled him toward the elevator, a commotion at the emergency entrance caught my attention. Men in dark suits, not police, not paramedics. Security interceded, voices rising in a mixture of Russian and Korean. Keep moving, I instructed the team, deliberately turning my attention back to the patient. Whatever was happening could wait. This boy's life could not. The surgery lasted 6 hours. Multiple bleeding vessels, a lacerated spleen that couldn't be salvaged, a damaged section of bowel requiring resection. The bullet that had entered his chest had narrowly missed his heart but damaged a pulmonary artery, the kind of injury with survival rates measured in single-digit percentages. By the time I closed, my shoulders ached from tension, my feet numb from standing in one position so long. But the boy was alive, critical but stable. As I left the surgical suite, peeling off my gown and cap, Dr. Shin was waiting. We need to talk, he said quietly, guiding me to an empty consultation room rather than the post-op area where I would normally go to document the procedure. "The patient is stabilized," I began. "We had to remove the spleen and—" "Mincio," Dr. Shin interrupted, using my first name rather than professional title, a rarity that immediately captured my attention. "Do you know who you just operated on?" "A teenager with a Koslov organization tattoo," I replied cautiously. "I assumed a young recruit or associate." Dr. Shin shook his head. "That's Mikhail Koslov, Viktor Koslov's only son." The revelation hit like ice water. Not just any Koslov associate, but the heir to the organization that had ordered my beating, that had nearly killed Jung-hoon Park, that had engaged in a shadow war with Jae-sung's syndicate for control of Seoul's underworld. "Viktor Koslov was released from prison last week," Dr. Shin continued. "His associates are in the waiting room now demanding information. Hospital security has contained the situation, but—" He hesitated. "There's something else you should know. The gunshot wounds. Ballistic analysis from the police suggests the ammunition is consistent with the type exclusively used by Kang's organization." My mind raced through implications. Jae-sung was in Singapore on legitimate business. Had he ordered this from abroad? No, he wouldn't target a child, regardless of parentage. But his organization was vast, with leaders who might act independently, especially against their most hated rivals. "The boy is critical but stable," I said, focusing on the medical reality rather than swirling questions. "He'll require additional surgeries and intensive rehabilitation. The damage to his pulmonary artery was severe. He may never regain full lung capacity." "I understand, Dr. Shin said carefully. "But given your personal connection to Kong and the history with Koslov's organization—" "I'm his doctor," I cut in firmly. "That's the only relevant connection in this hospital." Dr. Shin studied me with eyes that had seen too much of the shadow world that existed alongside ordinary Seoul. "The hospital administrator suggests you take a step back from this case. For your own protection." Anger flashed through exhaustion. "I just spent 6 hours saving this boy's life. I'm the most qualified trauma surgeon on staff to manage his recovery. My personal life has no bearing on my professional obligations." "Mincio." Dr. Shin's voice softened. "Viktor Koslov is in the building. If he learns who you are, your connection to Kong, the history between you, then he'll know I'm the doctor who saved his son despite every reason not to." I straightened, decision made. "I took an oath, Dr. Shin. It doesn't include exceptions for patients with dangerous fathers or inconvenient politics." He sighed, recognizing the immovable determination that had carried me through medical school, through my recovery, through establishing myself in a hospital where whispers about my relationship with Jae-sung sometimes overshadowed recognition of my surgical skill. "At least let me call Kong," he suggested. "He should know the situation." I considered this, then nodded. Jae-sung deserved information, even if I had no intention of stepping away from my patient. "Tell him I'm safe and doing my job. That's all he needs to know for now." Dr. Shin nodded, then hesitated at the door. "The boy's prognosis, will he fully recover?" The question carried weight beyond medical curiosity. We both understood the implications of Viktor Koslov's son being permanently disabled under my care. "He'll live," I said honestly, "but the damage was extensive. His left lung capacity is compromised. He'll likely never regain full function. Sports, physical exertion, these will be challenging for him moving forward." "I see." Dr. Shin's expression was grave. "I'll inform the family. And Mincio, be careful." After he left, I took a moment to breathe, to center myself before facing what would inevitably be a complicated conversation with the Koslov family. My phone vibrated with an incoming text. "Coming home immediately. Stay at hospital where security is present. Do not engage with Koslov directly. Please." The message was so characteristically Jae-sung, commanding yet ending with that small "please" that acknowledged my independence, my right to make my own choices. A year of careful negotiation between his protective instincts and my autonomy had created this language between us. Patient stable. Doing my job. Security present. Be safe during travel. I typed back, deliberately not promising to avoid Koslov. Some decisions needed to be made in the moment with the medical facts at hand. I stopped by the surgical lounge to change into fresh scrubs, splash water on my face, and prepare for what would inevitably be a tense family discussion. When I entered the private waiting area designated for Mikhail's family, I was met with a tableau of power barely contained. Viktor Koslov was not what I had expected. In my mind, he had become monstrous. The faceless entity who had ordered men to beat me in an alley, who had waged war against Jae-sung's organization. The reality was more mundane. A man in his 50s with silver-threaded dark hair, expensive suit, and eyes that held cold calculation beneath a veneer of civilized concern. For men flanked him, security or lieutenants, their stances conveying readiness despite the hospital setting. Dr. Shin stood slightly apart, having apparently just finished providing initial information. Mr. Koslov, I said, stepping forward. I'm Dr. Park. I performed your son's emergency surgery. Koslov's eyes assessed me with unsettling intensity. You saved him. The surgical team stabilized him, I corrected, falling into the practiced language of medical communication. His condition remains critical, but he's currently stable. Critical, Koslov repeated, the word heavy with implication. Explain exactly what this means for my son. I outlined Mikhail's injuries and treatment in clear, direct terms: the removed spleen, the damage to his lung, the multiple transfusions required to replace lost blood. I explained the likely course of recovery, the additional procedures that would be necessary, the rehabilitation process that would follow. And the permanent effects? Koslov asked, his accent more pronounced as emotion slipped through his controlled facade. This was the moment, the hard truth that could spark unpredictable consequences. But I had never believed in sugarcoating medical realities, regardless of who sat before me. The damage to his pulmonary artery and left lung was extensive, I said evenly. While he will recover enough for normal daily activities, he will likely maintain only 60 to 70% of normal lung capacity. Physical exertion will be challenging. Contact sports, certainly, are inadvisable going forward. Something dangerous flickered in Koslov's eyes. My son is a competitive swimmer. He was training for national competitions. I understand this is difficult news, I acknowledged. But given the extent of his injuries, the fact that he survived at all is remarkable. Many with similar wounds don't make it to the hospital. Yet you managed to save him, Koslov observed, studying me with renewed intensity. Despite limitations. The emphasis on that last word carried hidden meaning, made me wonder how much he knew about me, about my connection to Jae-sung, about our history. Medicine is my only consideration with any patient, I stated firmly. Your son received the full extent of my training and capability, as would any person under my care. Koslov stepped closer, not threatening, but deliberately entering my personal space. One of his men tensed, but Koslov raised a hand slightly, stopping whatever intervention might have occurred. Dr. Park, he said softly. Mincio Park. I believe we have mutual acquaintances. My heartbeat accelerated, but I kept my expression neutral. My only concern is your son's medical care, Mr. Koslov. Any other associations are irrelevant in this hospital. A thin smile curved his lips. Admirable compartmentalization. I wonder if Kong maintains similar professional boundaries. So he knew. Of course he knew. In the shadow economy of information that governs Seoul's underworld, such connections would be well documented. Mikhail will be moved to the ICU within the hour, I said, deliberately redirecting the conversation. Once settled, you'll be able to see him briefly. I suggest focusing your energy on his recovery rather than peripheral matters. Koslov studied me for a long moment, then nodded almost imperceptibly. You're either very brave or very foolish, Dr. Park. Perhaps both. An interesting combination. I'm simply a doctor doing her job, I replied. If you have medical questions about your son's condition, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, I have other patients requiring attention. As I turned to leave, Koslov spoke again. Dr. Park, my son's life is in your hands. I trust you understand the significance of this responsibility. The words carried unmistakable weight, both acknowledgement and warning wrapped in clinical civility. Every patient's life carries the same significance in my operating room. I responded, meeting his gaze directly. Your son will receive excellent care, Mr. Kosloff. That's the only guarantee any doctor can honestly provide. I left before he could respond, maintaining professional composure until I was safely in the doctor's lounge. Once alone, I allowed myself a moment of reaction, hands trembling slightly as I poured a cup of coffee I didn't really want, just to have something to hold. Viktor Kosloff knew who I was, knew my connection to Jae-sung, and now his son's life, his future, had been altered permanently under my surgical care. The implications rippled outward like stones dropped in still water, creating patterns I couldn't fully predict. My phone vibrated again. Not Jae-sung this time, but Min-ho, his right-hand man who had become something of a friend over the past year. Security team in place. 6 men rotating through hospital. Unmarked but present. Dr. Shin is aware. A second message followed immediately. JK landing in 2 hours. Requests you remain at hospital until his arrival. Says to tell you it's not an order, just very strong preference. Despite everything, a small smile tugged at my lips. The careful phrasing was so characteristic of how our relationship had evolved. His protective instincts balanced by respect for my autonomy, my independence tempered by recognition of legitimate security concerns. Understood, I replied to Min-ho. On call for next 12 hours anyway. We'll stay with patient. The next hours passed in clinical routine, checking Mikhail's postoperative status, adjusting medication orders, consulting with the ICU team about his care plan. I deliberately maintained normal rounds with my other patients, refusing to allow Kosloff's presence to disrupt my professional responsibilities. It was nearly midnight when I stepped into Mikhail's ICU room for another assessment. The boy remained unconscious, intubated, his body fighting to recover from both massive trauma and extensive surgery. Machines monitored every vital function. Medication dripped steadily through 4 lines. Chest tubes drained accumulated fluid from his damaged lung cavity. Beneath the medical apparatus, I could see the youth more clearly, the unformed features caught between childhood and adulthood, the vulnerability that transcended his family's reputation. In sleep, stripped of context and conscious identity, he was simply a wounded boy whose body I had tried to repair. You should rest. The voice from the doorway startled me. Jae-sung stood there, still in travel clothes, dark suit slightly rumpled from the flight, hair wind-tousled, eyes tired but alert. No one had informed me of his arrival, though I wasn't surprised he had gained access despite hospital protocols. I will, I promised, completing my notation in Mikhail's chart. After this assessment, Jae-sung entered the room fully, his gaze sweeping over the unconscious boy with unreadable expression. Kosloff's son. My patient, I corrected gently. Something softened in his face as he looked at me. Pride mingled with concern. Always the doctor first. It's one of the things I love about you. Not just one of the things I hope. The light response came automatically, our practiced pattern of affectionate banter momentarily pushing back the tension of the situation. A significant one among many, he acknowledged, moving closer. His hand brushed mine briefly, the small touch conveying more than an embrace might have in that moment. Are you all right? I'm tired, concerned about post-op complications, professionally focused. I met his eyes directly. I'm not afraid, if that's what you're asking. Jae-sung nodded, accepting my assessment. Kosloff, we spoke briefly. He knows who I am, who we are to each other. I kept my voice low, mindful of hospital ears despite the privacy of the ICU room. He was controlled, professional on the surface. And beneath the surface? I considered this, recalling the cold calculation in Kosloff's eyes. Angry, concerned for his son, assessing variables and implications. Like me, Jae-sung observed with grim humor. Similar thinking patterns, different value systems. I agreed. It was something I'd noticed about men in Jae-sung's position, The same strategic minds could produce vastly different outcomes depending on the core values guiding their decisions. Jae-sung's attention returned to Mikhail, his expression thoughtful. The shooting, it wasn't ordered by me or anyone in my organization. I know. My response was immediate, certain. He looked at me with slight surprise. That confident in my moral boundaries? That confident in your strategic thinking? I clarified. Targeting Koslov's son would be unnecessarily provocative, especially with your current business transition. It doesn't align with your goals or methods. A small smile touched his lips. Your analysis continues to impress, Dr. Park. I've had a year to study you, I reminded him, returning the smile briefly before growing serious again. But someone wanted this to appear connected to your organization. The ammunition is a specific type associated with my security teams, Jae-sung confirmed. Min-ho is investigating. Initial information suggests a third party hoping to reignite conflict between Koslov and myself. Perhaps someone who benefits from chaos in the interim. I nodded, the political landscape of Seoul's underworld still complex despite my year of peripheral exposure to it. Jae-sung's gradual transition toward legitimate business had created power vacuums, opportunities for smaller players to advance, incentives for some to maintain the status quo of conflict. The boy's prognosis? He asked, returning to the immediate situation. Survival likely with current trajectory. Full recovery. I shook my head slightly. His left lung is permanently compromised. He'll never swim competitively again. Jae-sung absorbed this with the gravity it deserved. Koslov values strength above all else. Physical perfection. His son's limitations will be difficult for him to accept. That's not my concern, I said, perhaps too sharply. My job was to save his life, not preserve his athletic career. I understand, Jae-sung soothed, no judgment in his tone. But Koslov may see things differently, may look for someone to blame. The implication hung between us, unnecessary to voice aloud. If Koslov sought vengeance for his son's condition, I presented an obvious target. The surgeon who had made decisions that saved Mikhail's life at the cost of his physical prowess, who happened to be the partner of Koslov's greatest rival. I stand by my medical decisions, I said firmly, and I won't be intimidated away from this case. Jae-sung studied me for a long moment, his expression a complex mixture of pride, concern, and resignation. I expected nothing less, but additional security remains non-negotiable. I nodded, accepting this reasonable boundary. Discreet. Nothing that interferes with my work or alarming to other patients. Already arranged, he assured me. Min-ho has coordinated with hospital security. You'll barely notice their presence. A comfortable silence fell between us as I completed Mikhail's assessment, adjusting ventilator settings and medication dosages with Jae-sung watching quietly from the corner of the room. This too had become part of our rhythm over the past year. His respect for my professional space, his willingness to be present without dominating. You need rest, he observed as I finally stepped away from the bedside. You've been awake for nearly 30 hours. The on-call room is adequate, I said, though exhaustion was indeed pulling at me. I should stay close in case. Dr. Shin has arranged coverage, Jae-sung interrupted gently. 4-hour window. Enough for real sleep in a real bed. I hesitated, torn between professional dedication and physical necessity. Jae-sung didn't press further, simply waiting for my decision. Another evolution in our relationship. Early on, he might have insisted, might have arranged things without consulting me. Now he presented information, options, then trusted my judgment. All right, I conceded. 4 hours. Then I return, regardless of how things stand. He nodded, accepting my terms without argument. Your apartment or mine? The question carried no pressure, just practical logistics. My small apartment was closer to the hospital but lacked the security of his penthouse. Each had become partially shared space over the past year. My medical journals and spare scrubs appearing in his guest room. His imported tea and extra suit hanging in my closet. Yours, I decided, practical concerns outweighing preference for my own space in this situation. But I need to stop at mine for fresh clothes. Already handled, he said, a hint of satisfaction in his tone. Minho brought essentials to the penthouse before meeting me at the airport. I raised an eyebrow. Presumptuous. Prepared, he countered with the barest smile. And hoping you'd make the logical choice. And if I'd chosen differently, then Minho would have delivered everything to your apartment instead. His smile widened slightly. I've learned not to predict your choices, only to accommodate them. The simple statement encapsulated so much of how we'd built our relationship. His resources and planning balanced by my independence, his protective instincts tempered by respect for my agency. A partnership constantly negotiated and renegotiated as we navigated the complexities of our very different worlds. As we left Mikhail's room, I nodded to the ICU charge nurse. I'll be unavailable for 4 hours. Dr. Chun is covering. Call him first for any changes in the Koslov case. Yes, Dr. Park, she acknowledged. Dr. Shin left specific instructions. In the elevator descending to the parking garage, Jae-sung maintained a professional distance. No physical contact that might feed hospital gossip. Only when we reached his car, a sleek black Genesis guarded by an unobtrusive security team member, did he take my hand. You performed impossible surgery today, he said quietly. Saved a life most would have lost. All while knowing exactly who he was, what his father had done. I did my job, I replied simply. No. Jae-sung's fingers tightened around mine. You did more than your job. You stayed true to your principles under extraordinary circumstances. It's why he paused, something vulnerable flickering across his usually controlled features. Why you what? I prompted, suddenly very awake despite my exhaustion. He opened the car door instead of answering immediately. Once we were both inside the privacy of the vehicle, he turned to me with rare openness in his expression. It's why I've been carrying this for 2 months, waiting for the right moment. From his jacket pocket, he withdrew a small box covered in deep blue velvet. Not the typical jewelry box for a ring, but something more unusual, rectangular, about 3 inches long. My heart stuttered as he placed it in my palm. Jae-sung. Open it, he said softly. Please. Inside, nestled on white silk, lay an antique key, bronze with intricate Korean designs worked into its head, attached to a simple silver chain. It's beautiful, I said, confused but appreciative. But I don't understand. It belonged to my grandmother, Jae-sung explained, his voice carrying unusual emotion. It opened the cabinet where she kept her most valued possessions. She gave it to my mother on her wedding day, not as ownership of those possessions, but as symbol that she was trusted with what was precious. Understanding began to dawn as he continued. In our tradition, the man typically asks the woman's family for permission to marry. But your grandmother once told me something I've never forgotten. She said, if you ever decide to ask for her hand, you should ask Minseo first. She belongs to herself before she belongs to anyone else. Tears pricked behind my eyes at this perfect encapsulation of Halmoni's wisdom, her understanding of what I valued most. This key is not a ring, Jae-sung said carefully. Not yet. It's a question. Would you consider building a life with me, not as possession but as partnership? Not surrendering your independence, but choosing to share it. The thoughtfulness of the gesture, offering something symbolic rather than immediate, acknowledging my need for autonomy within connection, embodied everything we'd built together over the past year. The key can be worn as a necklace, he continued when I remained speechless. A private symbol between us while you consider. If and when you're ready for a more public commitment, we can discuss what form that might take. I closed my fingers around the key, feeling its weight, physical and symbolic. You continue to surprise me, Jae-sung Kong. Is that a yes? He asked, rare uncertainty in his voice. It's a I will consider this with the seriousness it deserves, I answered honestly. After we navigate the current situation. After I've had more than 20 minutes of sleep in the past 30 hours. He laughed softly. The genuine, unguarded sound I'd worked so hard to earn over months of careful trust building. Fair terms, Dr. Park. I would expect nothing less tactical from you. I leaned across the console to kiss him briefly. But while I'm considering, I would be honored to wear your grandmother's key. He helped me fasten the chain around my neck, the key settling against my skin beneath my clothes. A private promise, a question waiting for its answer. As exhaustion finally claimed me during the drive to his penthouse, I drifted to sleep with my hand curled protectively around this new symbol, unaware of how soon both it and our relationship would be tested beyond anything we had yet faced. The 4 hours of promised rest extended to nearly 6 when Jae-sung silenced my alarm, letting me sleep while he monitored hospital updates through Minho. I woke disoriented but refreshed, momentarily confused to find myself in his penthouse bedroom wearing one of his t-shirts, the events of the previous day flooding back in fragments. Mikhail Koslov, emergency surgery, Viktor Koslov's veiled threats, Jae-sung's unexpected proposal. My hand went instinctively to my throat, finding the antique key still hanging from its chain. Not a dream, then. Good morning, Jae-sung said from the doorway, already dressed in one of his impeccable suits despite the early hour. He carried a cup of the barley tea I preferred and a plate with sliced fruit and toast. You needed the extra sleep. I sat up, accepting the tea gratefully. Mikhail's condition? Stable through the night, he reported, setting the plate beside me. Dr. Chun performed scheduled procedures at 4 a.m., all markers improving marginally. I nodded, professional relief mixing with personal concerns. And Koslov remained at the hospital overnight, brought in his own medical consultant, a specialist from Moscow, to review your work. A hint of satisfaction crept into Jae-sung's voice. The consultant apparently confirmed what you told him, that Mikhail's survival itself was remarkable given the extent of his injuries. That's good, I said cautiously. Professional validation was welcome, but Koslov's response to his son's prognosis remained unpredictable. Any movement on identifying the actual shooters? Jae-sung's expression hardened slightly. Minho has promising leads. The ammunition was indeed taken from one of our supply caches, a smaller warehouse that was breached 3 weeks ago. We reported the theft but kept it quiet while investigating internally. So someone is deliberately trying to frame your organization. I concluded, mind working through implications despite my just-woken state. Creating conflict between you and Koslov when you're both vulnerable. You because of your business transition, him because of his recent release from prison. Precisely. Jae-sung's approval of my analysis was evident. The timing is too convenient to be coincidental. I ate a piece of toast while processing this information. I need to get back to the hospital. Check Mikhail's status personally. Review next steps in his treatment. Already arranged. Jae-sung nodded toward the bathroom, where I could see fresh scrubs and my hospital ID waiting. Minho will drive you. I have business matters to address this morning. The careful phrasing told me his business matters involved investigating the shooting, likely through channels and methods I preferred not knowing specific details about. Another negotiated boundary in our relationship. His understanding that I didn't want deniability, merely discretion in what was shared explicitly. Be careful, I said simply, accepting without approving. His expression softened. Always. And Min Seo. I know, I interrupted gently. Security protocols, awareness of surroundings, nothing heroic. Standard procedure when potential threats are active. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. You've learned my security briefing by heart. Self-preservation, I countered, returning the smile. It's shorter to recite it myself than to hear it again. The light moment provided welcome balance to the seriousness of our situation. Another aspect of our relationship that had developed over time. The ability to find small moments of normalcy, of humor, even amid tension and potential danger. 40 minutes later, I walked through Seoul Hope Hospital's main entrance. Outwardly, just another doctor arriving for morning rounds. Only someone looking very closely might notice Minho's discreet escort to the elevator, or the seemingly random hospital staff whose attention sharpened slightly as I passed. Jae-sung's security was good, professional, unobtrusive, effectively invisible to anyone not specifically looking for it. I'd initially resisted such measures, viewing them as excessive and potentially compromising my professional independence. Over time, I'd come to accept them as a reasonable compromise given the realities of Jae-sung's world and its occasional intersection with mine. My first stop was Mikhail Koslov's ICU room, where I found Dr. Chan completing his final assessment before handoff. "Good morning, Dr. Park," he greeted professionally. "Patient remained stable overnight. We've begun weaning sedation to assess neurological status. Latest blood work shows improving kidney function, though liver enzymes remain elevated." I reviewed the chart as he spoke, noting with approval the precise documentation of all interventions and responses. "Excellent work, Dr. Chun. Any visitors overnight besides the father?" A medical consultant from Moscow reviewed our procedures and notes around 2 a.m., he confirmed. He agreed with all interventions. Mr. Koslov remained until about 3 a.m., then left with 2 associates. "He's expected back this morning." I nodded, approaching Mikhail's bedside to conduct my own assessment. The boy remained intubated but showed encouraging signs: better color, improving vital signs, expected post-operative progress. As I checked the surgical sites, his eyelids fluttered, the first indication of emerging consciousness. "Increase monitoring frequency," I instructed the ICU nurse. "He may begin waking within the next few hours. We'll need to evaluate cognitive function before considering extubation." As I completed my notes, the atmosphere in the room shifted subtly. Looking up, I found Viktor Koslov standing in the doorway, his imposing presence somehow larger than his physical frame warranted. "Dr. Park," he acknowledged with a slight nod. "Your colleague informs me Mikhail is improving. His vital signs are stabilizing," I confirmed, maintaining professional detachment. "We're beginning to reduce sedation to assess neurological function." Koslov stepped fully into the room, his attention divided between his son and me. "Your work has been validated by my specialist." He was quite impressed with the emergency procedures you performed. The compliment seemed genuine, if reluctant. I inclined my head slightly in acknowledgement. "I'm glad he found our care appropriate. Medicine transcends other considerations when a life is at stake." "Indeed." Koslov's piercing gaze settled on me more fully. "May I speak with you privately, Dr. Park? About Mikhail's continued treatment. Professional obligation ward with security awareness. Proper protocol would be to speak with Koslov about his son's condition. He was the legal guardian, the decision-maker for medical choices moving forward. Yet Jae-sung's warnings echoed in my mind. Of course, I decided, prioritizing my role as Mikhail's physician. The consultation room across the hall would be appropriate. If Koslov noticed the security personnel subtly repositioning as we moved to the small, glass-walled room, he gave no indication. Once seated across from me at the small table, he studied me with calculated interest. "You wear no engagement ring," he observed unexpectedly. "Yet I understand your relationship with Kong is significant." I maintained a neutral expression despite my surprise at this personal opening. "My relationship status isn't relevant to your son's medical care, Mr. Koslov." "Isn't it?" he countered smoothly. "You are the partner of a man whose organization has been at war with mine for years. Now my son's life depends on your professional decisions. The context seems relevant. Your son is alive because of my professional decisions," I reminded him calmly. "Decisions made without regard to any external relationships or histories." Koslov leaned forward slightly. "A remarkable compartmentalization. I wonder if Kong would demonstrate similar professional detachment if our situations were reversed." The implied comparison rankled, but I kept my response measured. "I can only speak to my own medical ethics, Mr. Koslov. Now, regarding Mikhail's continued treatment." "My son was Olympic potential," Koslov interrupted, a flash of genuine pain crossing his features. "His swimming times were among the best in his age group nationally. Now you tell me he will never compete again." "The damage to his lung was extensive," I explained, shifting to medical facts rather than emotional implications. "The bullet fragmented, causing multiple perforations. We were able to repair the most critical injuries, but some damage is permanent. With dedicated rehabilitation, he can still lead a full life. A diminished life, Koslov cut in sharply. Less than he was before. Different, I corrected, meeting his gaze directly. Not less. There are adaptive sports programs, other competitive outlets. Mikhail is young, resilient. His identity need not be defined solely by what he's lost. Koslov studied me with renewed intensity. You speak from experience. The observation was unexpected, perceptive. I hesitated, then nodded slightly. I sustained injuries last year that temporarily affected my surgical career. Adaptation was necessary, but limitation in one area often leads to growth in others. Yes, your encounter in the alley. Koslov's expression revealed nothing. An unfortunate incident. The deliberate understatement of violence that had nearly killed me was clearly intended to provoke a reaction. I gave him none, maintaining clinical composure. Mikhail will need several additional surgeries, I continued, redirecting to medical matters. The next is scheduled for tomorrow morning, a thoracic procedure to repair remaining damage to the bronchial structures. After that, we can better assess his recovery timeline. Koslov leaned back, accepting my refusal to engage with his provocations. And you will perform these surgeries personally? I'll lead the thoracic team, yes. Dr. Shin will assist with specific aspects of pulmonary reconstruction. Despite potential conflicts of interest, there are no conflicts affecting my medical judgment, I stated firmly. Only my obligation to provide the best possible care to my patient. Koslov's expression shifted slightly, not quite approval, but something adjacent to respect. You are either exceptionally principled or exceptionally naive, Dr. Park. Perhaps both. He rose from his chair. I will remain for Mikhail's procedures. All of them. And I will hold you personally responsible for his outcomes. The statement carried unmistakable weight, both acknowledgement of my role and subtle threat regarding the consequences of failure. I accept that responsibility, I replied evenly, standing as well, as I do with every patient under my care. As Koslov turned to leave, he paused at the door. One more question, Dr. Park. Do you believe Kang's organization was responsible for shooting my son? The directness of the question startled me. I considered my response carefully, aware of implications in either direction. Based on my knowledge of Jae-sung Kang's strategic approach, targeting your son would be counterproductive to his current objectives, I answered honestly. It would provoke exactly the kind of conflict that would destabilize his transition to legitimate business. Koslov's eyes narrowed slightly. A diplomatic non-answer. A logical assessment, I countered. But my expertise is surgery, not intelligence analysis. I suggest focusing on your son's recovery rather than premature conclusions about responsibility. A ghost of something, perhaps amusement, flickered across Koslov's face. You would have made a formidable negotiator in another life, Dr. Park. He inclined his head slightly. Until tomorrow's surgery. After he left, I released a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, the tension of the exchange catching up with me. Through the glass walls, I could see Min-ho materialize nearby, his presence a reminder of Jae-sung's protective framework constantly operating in the background of my life. Everything all right, Dr. Park? He asked as I exited the consultation room, his formal address appropriate for the hospital setting. Fine, I assured him. Just discussing medical options with Mr. Koslov. Min-ho nodded, his expression neutral but his eyes communicating that he had been monitoring the interaction closely. Dr. Shin asked me to inform you that the hospital administrator wishes to see you when convenient. The subtext was clear. The administrator wanted to discuss the Koslov situation and potential implications for the hospital. I sighed internally but nodded. I'll go now. Better to address concerns directly. The hospital administrator's office occupied prime space on the top floor, with views of Seoul's skyline that reminded me incongruously of Jae-sung's penthouse. Dr. Young, a career administrator with political connections and minimal clinical experience, rose as I entered. Dr. Park, he greeted with professional warmth that didn't reach his eyes. Thank you for coming so promptly. Please sit. I took the offered chair, noting the carefully arranged files on his desk. My personnel records prominently displayed alongside what appeared to be Mikhail Kozlov's case documentation. I understand you've been leading young Mr. Kozlov's care, Dr. Young began, his tone measured, quite successfully under difficult circumstances. He's stabilizing, I confirmed. We have additional procedures scheduled to address remaining injuries. Dr. Young nodded, folding his hands on the desk. The hospital board is concerned about potential complications arising from this case. Not medical complications, he clarified quickly, but situational ones. You mean my relationship with Jae Sung Kong and its potential impact on treating Victor Kozlov's son? I stated directly, seeing no value in pretending to misunderstand. A flicker of discomfort crossed Dr. Young's face at my bluntness. Seoul Hope Hospital maintains strict ethical guidelines regarding conflicts of interest. Dr. Park, your personal associations, while your private business, become relevant when they potentially impact patient care or hospital security. Has my treatment of Mikhail Kozlov been anything less than exemplary? I asked calmly. No, he admitted. By all accounts, including the Russian specialist's assessment, your care has been exceptional. Then there is no conflict affecting my professional performance, I concluded. My personal life remains separate from my medical practice. Dr. Young shifted uncomfortably. The board suggests, not orders but strongly recommends, transferring Mikhail's case to another surgeon. One without complicated associations. Anger flashed through me, though I kept my expression neutral. Transferring critical care mid-treatment introduces unnecessary risks. Mikhail's case requires continuity of provider knowledge and approach. Any surgeon taking over would need extensive briefing, review of all procedures already performed, and would lack the first-hand experience with his specific injuries. We understand the medical considerations, Dr. Young acknowledged. But we must balance them against potential reputational and security concerns. My priority is my patient, I said firmly. If the board wishes to formally remove me from this case, they can present that decision in writing with specific clinical justification. Otherwise, I will continue providing the care Mikhail Kozlov needs, regardless of who his father is or who I may be personally connected to. Dr. Young studied me for a long moment, clearly weighing institutional politics against medical best practices. You understand this places the hospital in a difficult position. I understand my obligation as a physician, I replied evenly. Do you wish to formally override that obligation? The direct challenge hung between us. Finally, Dr. Young sighed. Continue as primary surgeon for now, but the board will be monitoring the situation closely. Any hint of complication, medical or otherwise, and we will revisit this discussion. I stood, recognizing the conditional victory for what it was. I'll provide detailed documentation of all procedures and decisions. Complete transparency. That would be appreciated, Dr. Young acknowledged, clearly relieved to end the confrontation with a reasonable compromise. And Dr. Park. I paused at the door, looking back expectantly. Your work here has been exemplary, he said with unexpected sincerity. Whatever concerns exist about external factors, your surgical skill and dedication to patients is not in question. The professional acknowledgement, however reluctantly given, meant more than I expected. Thank you. I'll continue earning that assessment. The rest of the day passed in careful preparation for Mikhail's next surgery, reviewing imaging, consulting with the thoracic specialist who would assist, ensuring all necessary equipment and blood products were ready. I performed 2 other procedures on different patients, maintaining normal responsibilities despite the undercurrent of tension surrounding the Kozlov case. It was evening when I finally returned to Mikhail's room for a final assessment before leaving for the night. The boy was showing increasing signs of consciousness, though we maintained intubation for respiratory support. As I checked his vital signs, his eyelids fluttered, then opened fully, revealing dark eyes clouded with confusion but definitely alert. Mikhail, I said clearly, leaning into his field of vision. I'm Dr. Park. You're in the hospital. You've been injured, but you're stable. Try not to fight the breathing tube. It's helping you right now." Recognition and panic flickered in his eyes as he became aware of the ventilator. I placed a gentle hand on his arm, continuing to speak in calm, direct terms, explaining his situation, the procedures performed, the current plan. Gradually, his panic subsided, replaced by wary attention. "You can't speak with the tube in place," I explained, "but you can communicate by blinking. 1 blink for yes, 2 for no. Do you understand?" 1 deliberate blink. "Good. Are you in pain right now?" 2 blinks, though his expression suggested discomfort if not acute pain. "We're maintaining pain medication, but we can adjust if needed. Your father has been here," I continued. "He'll return soon. Tomorrow we have another procedure scheduled to repair more of the damage to your lung." I kept my explanation simple but honest, respecting his right to understand his own condition despite his youth. As I spoke, I noticed his gaze drifting to something behind me. Turning slightly, I found Viktor Koslov standing in the doorway, watching our interaction with unreadable expression. "He's awake," Koslov observed, moving to his son's bedside. "Mikhail, du меня слышишь? Can you hear me?" 1 blink. Something softened in Koslov's severe features as he spoke rapid Russian to his son, terms of endearment and reassurance interspersed with practical information. I stepped back, giving them privacy while remaining available for medical questions. After several minutes, Koslov turned back to me. "He wants to know if he will swim again." The question I had dreaded, direct, unavoidable, requiring honesty rather than comfortable evasion. I moved back to Mikhail's line of sight, meeting his questioning gaze directly. "The damage to your left lung was extensive," I explained carefully. "We saved your life, but some limitations will remain. Competitive swimming at your previous level will likely not be possible." I watched as the information registered, saw grief, anger, and disbelief flash across his young face. His eyes closed tightly, rejecting the reality I had presented. However, I continued gently. "With dedicated rehabilitation and adaptation, you can still lead an active life. There are Paralympic swimming categories for athletes with respiratory limitations. Different, but still challenging and meaningful." Mikhail's eyes opened again, skepticism and hope warring in his expression. "I can't promise what level of recovery you'll achieve," I said honestly, "but I can promise that we'll do everything medically possible to maximize your lung function. The rest will depend on your determination and willingness to adapt." Koslov translated my words, adding something in Russian that made Mikhail's jaw set with stubborn determination. The boy looked at me directly, then gave a single, deliberate blink, accepting the challenge implicit in my assessment. "He understands," Koslov said, surprising me with what sounded like genuine gratitude. "Thank you for your honesty, Dr. Park. Children deserve truth, even difficult truth." The sentiment aligned so unexpectedly with my own medical philosophy that I found myself momentarily reevaluating my assessment of Viktor Koslov. Perhaps, like Jae-sung, he was more complex than his reputation suggested, capable of both calculated violence and genuine paternal love. "Tomorrow's procedure is scheduled for 7 a.m., I informed them both. "The anesthesia team will begin preparation at 6. I suggest you both rest as much as possible before then." As I turned to leave, Mikhail made a small noise around his breathing tube, a deliberate attempt to gain attention. When I looked back, his eyes conveyed clear determination despite his physically compromised state. 1 deliberate blink, yes to whatever challenge lay ahead. In that moment, I saw not the son of a criminal leader, not a pawn in power struggles between rival organizations, but simply a brave young patient facing difficult recovery with courage. It reinforced my commitment to his care, regardless of the complicated political landscape surrounding his case. What I couldn't know as I left the hospital that night, Jae-sung's security team escorting me to my apartment where I insisted on staying to review surgical plans, was how quickly those politics would escalate, or how directly they would threaten everything I valued. As I tell this to you now, I can still feel the cool weight of Jae-sung's grandmother's key against my skin, still recall the precise moment I realized its significance would soon be tested beyond anything we could have anticipated. Because when Viktor Koslov decided to move against Jae Sung Kong, he didn't target his business interests or his security teams. He targeted the two women Jae Sung would die to protect, my grandmother and me. And by dawn, Seoul Hope Hospital would become the battlefield where all our carefully constructed boundaries between professional and personal, between legitimate and shadow, between healing and harm, would collapse in a single, desperate fight for survival. If you think choosing between duty and safety is hard, you haven't seen what comes next. Subscribe now, because when a Korean mafia boss gets the text your wife is in surgery, what happens next will leave you breathless.